Hey everybody, welcome back. This cake is all about how I made this torn paper effect with fondant at work last week. And I will show you how I did it right after the intro. So for this cake, we used 3 different colors. We used white, lilac, and violet. I prepped this fondant by adding some Tylose to it, or CMC powder, whatever you prefer to call it. And what that does is it makes fondant dry out a little faster so that it holds its shape. It makes it more along the lines of gum paste. So I wanted to roll this out as thin as I could possibly get it because torn paper is very thin. So I rolled them out and I just left them on this mat covered with some saran wrap so that I could continue on with the next steps of the cake process. I wanted them to get a little dry so that when I went to tear the fondant, it would rip more like paper. And I did this with all 3 colors. I wanted to roll them out more in a rectangular shape, just purely for the fact that it was easier to fit it on this mat so that it could dry out a little bit. Also, it makes it a little easier to tear the pieces if it's not too wide. Now, sometimes I use my rolling pin more as to press out the fondant a little bit. If I'm having a hard time getting it rolled out thin enough, just by rolling it, I'll just put a little pressure on it and just kind of rub it on top of the fondant, and it kind of pushes it a little thinner. Now, like I said, this was an order I did at work last week, and I should let everybody know that I do work at a bakery in Illinois called QC Sweet Boutique. We do wedding cakes, birthday cakes, specialty cakes, and other desserts as well. Little plug for work. And now that I had all of the fondant rolled out and ready to go, I just made sure everything was covered up with the saran wrap and set it aside and got to work on the rest of the cake. Now that is just a piece of rolled up tape that I like to use to adhere the cake to the finish board. Just making sure that it's in the middle. That's why I leave the spatula underneath there so that I can move it if it's not centered. And it wasn't, so I had to go back and relocate it just a little bit. Once you've got it where you like it, just go ahead and pull that spatula right back out and clean up those edges a little bit. I'm using a 5-point star to mark where I'm going to put my straws. Just center that in the middle and press down a little bit to leave an impression. And you can see right where all those points are, that's where you're going to put your straws. I use the fat boba straws. And for a 2-tier cake, I'm going to go ahead and put them in, all of them in, mark them, cut them, and leave them in. For the 2-tier cakes, I'm okay with doing this. With taller cakes, I like to mark one straw and then cut all the other straws level with that straw. It's a little harder to keep everything level on a taller cake if you don't do that. That's just what I find. Not everybody feels the same way. And once you got them in there, use your scissors, pinch the straw a little bit where it's flush with the cake, raise it up and cut it. That way you know that it's at least level with the top of the cake. And just throw those bits away. The pieces you're cutting off, they're not long enough to do anything with anyways. A little bit of waste, but what can you do? Now just push them all back down. And my hands are clean, I swear. Even if there's stains on them, it's just food coloring, if you ever see that. And add a little buttercream just to get the 2 tiers to stick together. And I like to put a little buttercream on top of each straw also. Now to do the fondant, now that it's nice and ready to be torn, you do just exactly that. You just tear it. No more complicated than that. Since it's dried out some, it's not going to pull so much. It's going to tear. Plus having the Tylose powder in there helps also. And once you tear them, just go ahead and set them aside. You don't need to cover them up at this point because they're not going to dry out any significantly more amount at this point by the time you're ready to put them on the cake. So it's fine. You don't have to keep them covered up now. Now these longer pieces, I did end up shortening quite a bit. Maybe in half or a little bit more once I did put them on the cake. And I did this exact same thing with all of the 3 different colors of fondant. I didn't film all of them because you get the idea. And at this point, I realized that it was getting a little too thick. Sometimes the middle of your rolled out fondant can be a little thicker. For some reason, I think you just put more pressure towards the outside edges. So I just rolled it out a little bit thinner and continued with my tearing. So I just brushed on water to stick the fondant to the buttercream. The cake had been chilled for a good while I was getting everything else prepared. So it's nice and firm to the touch. So I could even brush it on the buttercream and it was fine. You could use piping gel if you would prefer, or royal icing, or even some buttercream, but I didn't want to add any bulges in the cake or in underneath the fondant, so I just went with straight water. And sometimes the piping gel, when you're dealing with condensation and this time of the year, it can sometimes get a little slippery. And with a full covering of fondant that does not have any attachment to the top of the cake, I worried that it might pull on the buttercream too much, or I'm sorry, on the piping gel too much, and I didn't want it to slide down the cake. So I just went with water and it was perfect. And when you're lining these up, don't be too strict with yourself on where you're putting them or too organized. Sometimes you can overlap one piece of fondant with the pieces on either side, just like that white piece right there. It doesn't have to be rows of everything overlapping exactly the same way, one piece to the next to the next. You can be more random than that. This last row, you're going to want to make sure that you have a straight cut edge on the bottom where it meets the board, just so you have a neat, clean edge there. Now, per the customer's request, I did go in and add some silver powder, luster powder, just sporadically here and there, just a touch of silver because they had a silver topper. Now, me personally, I thought it looked fine without it. I think it looks good with it too, but this wasn't my cake. So I just did what I was told to do and added some silver. This is just being dry brushed on. If you added some vodka or Everclear or some lemon extract to the powder, you'd get more of a shiny metallic look. This is just a subtle effect that they were going for. And then we needed to go, or they wanted us to go ahead and put a little around the bottom just for a little shading, which does sometimes end up on your board, especially if your cake drum has any texture to it. It's kind of hard to get that silver off, but you just use a little bit of your vodka or your Everclear and on a Q-tip or just on a towel, and it tends to pretty much wipe right off. Better anyways than just water and a towel. You could also cover the board with fondant for an even cleaner look. And then I'm using double-sided tape to put a ribbon around the bottom, a silver ribbon around the bottom. So you'll have silver with the topper, which unfortunately I don't have a picture of because I didn't get to see the final all put together since this is a work order. A silver topper and then silver touches on the fondant and then silver around the bottom, kind of wrapped it all up full circle. So there you go, guys. The torn paper effect on fondant. I hope you like this, and please like, share, subscribe, comment, interact, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.